Welcome to today's webinar, Creating a Culture of Equity and Reconciliation. My name is Pamela Teitelbaum. I'm Tamarack Institute's Consulting Director on Evaluating Impact, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this discussion and our guest speaker for today, Suzanne Methot.
Amazing.
So let's begin by just getting to know your work. I found it fascinating when reading your book and through the numerous conversations we've had, that I'm shamelessly doing a little mini plug again of your book, because I really felt that it was such a learning opportunity to contextualize the history of First Nations people in Canada a little bit, and also for gaining a better understanding of ways of engaging the community level, at the community level around healing, and also at the individual level around healing, reconciliation, and resilience from the Indigenous perspective. And I'm really intrigued with your work in the book for its voice and narrative, as well as the deeply reflective, thoughtful journey that you took me on. So I'm really excited to have that shared with people here today. And it really resonated with me both personally and professionally. And I've been talking and sharing a lot about it with friends, family, and colleagues as well. And I'm happy that you agreed to do the webinar, because it gives participants an opportunity to as well think about equity and reconciliation through the Indigenous lens that you're sharing with us today. And in doing community work, we often are engaging with a diverse community, and therefore we really need to be mindful of our personal experience and the way that interacts with our professional contexts and those within it. And as change makers, it's important to raise questions to ourselves and others about the biases we bring to our work and the approaches and ways in which we decide to address these. And we talked a little bit about this when we were thinking about the webinar, and as well how we seek justice and equity and equality, as well as strengthening relationships and embracing change. And so systems change work requires us to engage at all these various levels, and from the individual to the systems level. And so I'm really very happy to learn more about the model you're sharing with us today, and speak about how to integrate this into the community change work. So the first question that I have for you today is really, how can equity and reconciliation become rooted into all aspects of our work as change makers?
Well, how long do we have?
We have about 40 minutes.
I know. I want to have like 3 hours to talk about one question, but to use the time that we have wisely, I'll keep my answer as short as I can. And echo, first of all, to echo what you have already said, is that, you know, we need to be holistic about it. So rooting equity and reconciliation into our work means rooting it into everything. You've already talked about moving from the individual up to the systems we work in. That's sort of the connections that I want to make today with the model. But I think, and especially in light of recent events with the protests here and in the US, and the change that needs to happen in the various systems and institutions of what I, as an Indigenous person, call the dominant society. Some people might call it colonial society. Some people might just call it the world. You know, whatever your positionality is to these systems and institutions, we need to think about equity and reconciliation as not just being a thing that we do at one meeting or one workshop or ticking off the checklist. It needs to be rooted into our development as individuals and how we approach ourselves, living in our own bodies. We'll get to that today in the model. Yes. And we need to then think about, okay, there's the internal world, then there's the external world. How do we relate to other people? How do we relate to our clients or our colleagues? How do we actually relate to the intellectual, if you want, or the doing part of what we do? It has to be, equity and reconciliation has to be in all of those things. And that's where I think sometimes the difficulty is, right? Because it's hard sometimes for us all to conceptualize what that means. What do you mean I have to talk about reconciliation within myself? What does that mean? So hoping today that the model will help us shed light on just being holistic about it and understanding that it can't be a one-off. It has to be the place that we start, and it has to be the place that frames everything. These things have to frame everything, because everything else, you know, good service to our clients, fair thinking, equity, equity and reconciliation in being the first place, all of those other things will follow, right? That's what I found anyway in my work. I have control of the screen. I'm feeling mighty powerful at the moment. So I'm going to take over and go to our model. And I don't want anybody to think, oh, I didn't know this was a medicine wheel webinar. I've done that before. Don't leave us, because it's much more than what you've ever considered before. And that's not something that I'm saying, like, I'm presenting this amazing thing. No, this is this amazing model that I've learned from an elder that I've done a lot of work with. And so I am passing on something that has been taught to me. And I'm still learning how to use this model, but it is based in the medicine wheel, but it's much, much more than just maybe what you're used to. Maybe 4 colors, 2-dimensional, posted on a wall. That's still a very useful framework for understanding the concepts I'm going to get into here about interconnectedness and relationality and balance and transformation. But the model that I'm going to be introducing today really builds on those basics to take us farther. So we have the medicine wheel. And you sometimes see it in these both ways, right? Like with the quadrants, like with the quadrants sort of aligned more to the cardinal directions, but sometimes you see it per the model on the right here, the circle on the right, with the lines, sort of denoting the cardinal directions. And I asked the grandfather, the elder that has taught me this model, Michael Thrasher, well, which one is right, Michael? And most elders, when you ask a silly question like that, they're very kind, right? And they say, he said to me, well, both are right, of course, because it's not that one is wrong. It's just that they represent different things. So here's the different things. And I can flash back to that just to help us make this connection. So, one model can represent fire, the other model can represent water. Doesn't matter which one. But if you look at it at the 2 different ways, and which one should I use? Don't worry, use both, use either, whatever. Fire and water. Why? Because those are the basic building blocks of the universe. Fire being active energy, water being receptive energy. That's the balance. And a lot of different, indigenous peoples and cultures across the earth use this sort of model. I know the Ayurvedic system in South Asia, of course, traditional Chinese medicine. This is not something that is just thought of by indigenous peoples in North America. This is very widely known to be the way the universe works. So medicine wheel, fire and water. And then we can start complicating it a bit in a good way. And we can put those hatches, sort of, you see the additions of the lines into each quadrant. And what we're talking about when we do that is focusing on the cardinal directions, which for us, and from my nation, where I get these teachings, the Nehiawak Nation, is our connection to the spirit world. Often during, ceremony, we will call upon the grandmothers and grandfathers of the 4 directions, the ancestors, whatever. And this is, teachings we're not going to go into here, and it's not my place to go into them, but, there's certain things that the cardinal directions represent, right? So those hatches just remind us to be aware that the cardinal directions are the directions that we can connect to the spirit world. Now, before I go any farther, I want to say that if we have any participants who are from, a religion, an organized religion, and might feel uncomfortable with this because, I'm presenting something different and asking you to, accept this. For us, it's indigenous peoples, we don't really speak about having a religion. For us, it's just the way the universe works. It's not really like a formal religion. So it's more like a a cultural perspective, right? So then we can complicate it, but again, in a good way, further by adding that circle in the middle, if you see that. And that reminds us to think of the circle in the middle as the place of growth and change. So what Grandfather Thrasher has always taught me through, you know, the workshops I've attended with him and the work he did with the organizations I was working with in the 90s to create curriculum for Indigenous students in the school board and various social service organizations. You know, he has always said that humanity is in the center of the circle. So those little circles in the middle there remind us that we are standing in the circle. And this is where I find it diverges from that two-dimensional model that you sometimes see, which again is very useful, but sometimes people just end there. And so I'd like to ask us to think a little bit beyond that two-dimensional model and to envision the medicine wheel as like actually the universe in a box, that it is actually all the energy in the world and we are in the world. So therefore, all of this energy surrounds us. So to think of humanity or yourself as an individual as being at the center of the medicine wheel, and to think of it as something that you are in, not just something that you're looking at, right? That you are inside this energy and have the possibility to change this energy. And that's where growth and change comes into it, because when we're standing in the center of the medicine wheel, we can connect with all of the cardinal directions. We can connect with, you know, up as sun, down as earth, cardinal directions, fire, water, we're in it, right? And that connectivity, that balance, is what leads to growth, change, and transformation, right? So, yeah, bringing it all together. This slide shows us fire plus water is the balance we need. The circle is the growth and change. When we add balance to change, that's what leads us to that magical, but I use that in as an advice, you know, a word, like I don't want anybody to think it's hocus pocus poof, you know, it's work and we're going to get into the work, right? But the balance plus the change is how we get to transformation, because we need to be balanced as individuals, balanced as systems, balanced as societies, balanced as families, balanced as workers working together, as colleagues within our places of work. Then we add that standing in the center of the universe, accessing all of those points of power, whether it's our intellect or our bodies or the earth or ceremony or your spirituality, however you access that energy for, you know, growth, then those two things together bring us to the transformation, right?
Yeah.
And then I think I would just point out too that the final thing that Michael Thrasher has always taught through his model, and I don't mean to paraphrase him in any way, but just to say this is my understanding of what he's taught, right? Is to think of the medicine wheel as grounding us in our geographic location, because we know that there's 13 moons during one sun cycle. That's the year. During that year, there will be different seasons, right? And so this wheel helps ground us in time and in place, grounding us in that. And so, you know, Grandfather Thrasher has talked about, you know, you can understand it as being where we live over time, right? Which brings us back to this idea that we just spoke about of balance and change equals transformation. Well, the wheel, by grounding us in geographic location, is, but also, you know, challenging us, again, in a good way, to undergo change, both personally and systemically, to seek that constant transformation when it's needed, is about how to live in a particular place in any particular moment, the wheel gives us the strength and the tools to do that. You know, by accessing spirit world, accessing our own set of strengths. It also gives us coping mechanisms, because, you know, we can do ceremony, we can understand at certain seasons, you know, where we are in the land, look to the animal world and what are they doing and how can watching them teach me. Maybe that's a different, I can't go any more into that. That's like a different webinar, right? I know there's probably a couple of people going, well, how do you do that? Well, there's ways, right? But we'll leave it at that for now. Okay. All of that interconnectedness, though, that observing the world and observing one's place within it, and how do I fit within it? I guess that's how I would explain that, actually, going back to what I just said. That is the best way to sort of explain that, is that it's about that interconnectedness. How do I fit into the space that I'm in? And so we're going to make that jump to, you know, our systems in a second, but it's how to live in that particular place at that particular moment. It gives us tools to do that, but also tools to take that balance and change and make that transformative leap, right? But it starts with that connectedness and observing what's going on around you. Whether it's something that bothers you, that you think has to change, whether it's something that gives you great peace and you see it as a teaching, you take that and then you go forward, right? So, yeah. And, oh, here's the model. So, yeah. This is the model that Michael Thrasher's Hall was presented. I mean, well, no, you know what? Again, there's been different models depending on purpose, you know, because if you're using the medicine wheel in education, you can do different things with it. If you're using it for addictions counseling, you can do different things with it. But for this sort of general sort of model for transformation, this is what it is. So I would encourage you to not see this as hierarchical, even though it goes up. We tried to see how it would look best, and this is the way that sort of allows everybody to see everything without being too complex, like, wait, what's that arrow mean, you know, all that stuff. But I would encourage you not to sort of see it as, you know, movement or vision, time, feeling, and movement as the bottom, and then awareness, understanding, knowledge, and wisdom as the top. I would encourage you not to see it that way, but to see it as like a spiral, which is, and to see those kind of, you know, dotted lines as the connection between the layers of the wheel as we go up the spiral of learning, as we turn around that wheel, right? And I'll just go into what we mean by turning, okay, Pamela, because if this is unfamiliar to her, you might be thinking, if this model is unfamiliar to you, you might be thinking, well, what do we mean by turn? So I need to go there.
We had some challenges when we were talking, so this would be very helpful.
Yeah, because I understand that for a lot of people, wait, what? Like, this is the first time you've seen this. So that first bottom, whew, see, I hate all these words in English that make me make a hierarchy. Oy, I wish I had, you know, language words, but okay, that one on the one that starts vision, time, feeling, and movement.
There you go.
Those are the 4 gifts that we are given at birth. Every human being, whether ourselves, whether it's people we work with, whether it's clients we serve, students, you know, whatever our work in the world is, everybody on the earth is born with those 4 gifts. So vision is the ability to see, obviously. See what is, see what needs to be, see who you are, see who people are. It's all about seeing. Time is all about living on the land and relating to that a couple slides ago where I said, you know, living in a particular geographic space or location over time, right?
Yeah.
Time relates to the seasons and being where we are and being grounded in that space and seeing time as it passes. That time is a gift, right? And also time for us to do our work and to learn what we need to learn. Well, we'll get there as we go further in the model, but feeling is how we feel in our body, how our, what are we feeling like? Oh, I'm feeling like this is a lot of new information right now, or, oh, I'm feeling kind of confused right now, or whatever it is. That feeling is a gift, because when we work through it, then we get to another place, right? Again, it's all about transforming. Movement is all about the movement we need to achieve to take that vision, take the time, take the feelings that we're having, and realize where we want or need to be. That's movement. We have all four of those gifts as sacred beings on this earth, right? But then we can see that next layer as we go around. And and I said I would talk about going around, right? The medicine wheel for Indigenous peoples, the ones that do use it, not every Indigenous nation uses it, but most of the Plains nations, and I know the East Coast, they use it. And many nations who didn't historically use it, or are now even seeing this as a model that can be applied for the work that needs to be done. So, many nations that wouldn't have used it before are starting to use it today. When we talk about movement, we talk about moving through those cardinal directions, which, as I said, was the connection to the spirit world. So vision is in the eastern quadrant, so the east. Time is in the south. Feeling is in the west. Movement is in the north. So where does the new sun come from? Where does the dawn start? It starts in the east. So we always start in the east with vision. So when I talk about movement, it just means we always look to that eastern quadrant. We start there and we work our way around to the north. And that's what I mean by movement. So when we look at this model, always start with that east. That'll be your grounding point. And then work your way around clockwise. And again, this is the Nehio or Nehiwak model, because I know that different nations actually conceive of the circle and go counterclockwise, right?
Right.
So this is, again, a model based on my particular nation that, has been let go, free, people use it as you will kind of thing, but it's based in our clockwise, even though we didn't have clocks per se. So that, again, we have to use these English words, but it's fine. So then the next layer, so think of yourself as spiraling around from vision, time, feeling into movement. Then the next layer as we go through that spiral is the spiritual. And vision, and you see, if you look at the layers, that there's 4 easts, 4 south, 4 west, 4 north, right? So you can see all of those easts, plural, as, building on or connecting to one another. So vision relates to spiritual, relates to respect, relates to awareness. Time to physical relationship and understanding. Feeling relates to emotional, reason and knowledge. Movement relates to or connects to the intellectual, behaviors and wisdom. But not just that way. It's also a circular movement. So there are layers, there are circles. It's a very spiral, 3D sort of thing. That's very in its positioning, very quantum, particles, waves, constant movement, right? So look at the next, and I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but this is the basis for it all for the next set of slides, right? So we need to kind of get people grounded in this, right? Or because I think when our work together, otherwise it kind of won't make sense, right?
Yeah.
So the next layer, spiritual, physical, emotional, intellectual. I think that's pretty simple for most people. It's balancing ourselves so that we're not over intellectualizing. We're not only using our minds, but we're using our bodies and our spirits and our emotions to do our work. Next layer around that spiral, respect, relationship, reason, and behavior, and how that relates to everything. Much deeper teachings. I do get into them over the course of a couple pages in Legacy, in the book. So, a deeper, and I'm wondering if I should now I'm wondering if I should post this on the Trauma Story Healing website.
That would be great.
Yeah, that might help folks.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll get on that. Give me so we have to go through respect, relationship, reason, and behavior, and it relates to all of those other things. It's not just like random words that we throw in a circle and say, here's a medicine wheel. Like, that's not what we're doing here. We're building on. So vision relates to the spiritual because, for instance, knowing that, the spiritual gift of having a vision, right? We need to take a sort of a spiritual tack to understanding that. We also need to respect that in order to make sense of it. We can take time and physical and relate it to relationship, because living in a certain place, either our bodies or a geographic location over time, that relates to the physical environment or our bodies. That also relates to that next sort of level of relationship, because it's about being in relationship with ourselves, which determines how we are in relationship with others. It's also about being in relationship with that geographic location over time, and that physical location, our bodies or the world over time, and how that relates to our relationship to those things. So you see, it connects. It's not just rando words, right? It all sort of builds. Every east builds to every east, every south, every north, every west to each other, but also in a circular way, building upon. Because once we have that respect for our vision, once we consider relationship, then once we do the thinking, because we've already hit intellectual on the one underneath, right? Then we have to make decisions about, okay, how am I going to change my behavior? Or how am I going to change the behavior of my institution or my system, or influence change of behavior? How do I want this to help my clients or my students? What are the behaviors that are somewhat problematic in terms of, barriers that are posed to them, right? And their transformative opportunities. So everything builds, right? And everything relates. And then we get to that, again, top level, not hierarchical, and I'll tell you why, because once you get through awareness, understanding, knowledge, and wisdom, then you're going to go right back down to vision, time, feeling, and movement. Because once you get to, okay, awareness, I'm aware of what needs to happen. I think I understand how I'm going to make that change in myself or my system. What knowledge do I need to gather to do this work or to make this change? How does that lead us to some sort of wisdom, which is applying all of the rest of it to a real world application? You're not just going to end there and say, oh, I'm so good, right? Although it's tempting.
You can't stop midway.
Yeah, right. I mean, pat yourself on the shoulder a bit when you've done some hard work, but then you're going to go bloop, right back down to the vision, because of course the secret, well, here we go. Suzanne, this is what I think is the secret to the universe. I don't know if anybody will agree with me, but to me, the secret of the universe is constant transformation. You don't want to get stuck in any particular place. So you can't just end at wisdom and go, oh, I'm so wise. You have to go kerplunk and start over again, essentially. Because then once you're in that place, how do I deepen this? How do I reconceptualize what I've done in a stage 1 so that it becomes a stage 2 and we go deeper to the issues? And I'm speaking a bit abstract right now because we have to get to the detail in the last few slides. but that's the model, the grounding that we need to start. So when Pamela and I were working through, this is a lot, you guys, by the way. This is a lot. And I don't feel especially concerned about kerplunking it right here, because that's every workshop I ever went to with Michael Thrasher was just kerplunk on a flip chart or something. And then I would go, ha, and then I would spend like 5 years trying to figure it out, right? So at some point you just have to do the kerplunk and then do your work to, enlightenment never ends. I'm seeing the comments, by the way. I am looking at them all. And exactly, enlightenment never ends. You have to keep going and you keep, so here's the kerplunk. I know it's a lot, but this is the work for the next few years, is to see how we can use this model, right? But as Pamela and I were working through this, as I was discussing, you know, the knowledge that had been passed on to me and that I now have the responsibility to pass on to others, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, especially given the issues of the world that we see, Pamela was like, well, wait a minute. And I think the main issue was this. So this is going to be our poll question. What comes first in your personal or it can be either or both, personal and or cultural approach to gaining wisdom? And I think I saw a comment around, wait, how in my, you know, I've learned it this way, right? Or even a couple of comments. So that was a thing, even between Pamela and I, is like, okay, how do I make sense of this model? So the question is, do you seek the how of understanding and then the why of knowledge? Or do you see the why of knowledge and then the how of understanding? So we're talking about that first part, first again, that the top wheel of awareness, understanding, and going up to wisdom, right?
Yeah, and the poll's open. So if you got who the listeners can start to think about that and just add their answer. Yeah. I love this question because it really got us off on a great conversation to think about the different perspectives that we carry also from our professional backgrounds. And as a participatory evaluator, when we spoke about this, I was like, you know, evaluation, when you're doing participatory work or community engagement work, often we want to start with the how and seek an understanding and from a strategic place of the learning opportunities and gain a better understanding of how our interventions are having an influence at the community level and within the community, among community. And that's not often necessarily the case. Traditionally, it was very much around the knowledge, the piece around the knowledge and the why, like we talked about. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious to hear what people are going to see what people are going to respond to this question today.
Yeah. And I see some of the comments, like one person just said, whatever comes first, like I just let it happen. People are like,
more organic. They're more organic.
My way is this way, right? And that's just who I am. But I would present, again, just from my own nation, but you know, there's lots of diversity even within nations. So I don't know, should I say maybe just my community or maybe just myself?
Right.
You know, that but I have noticed this, not all, of course. We are very diverse people, we are individuals, but I've noticed with a lot of work within the Indigenous community that we seek the why of knowledge first, like why is this happening? And then the how, because that's the holistic part of it. That's the application of the why. And I think a lot of, and again, just because you're from a European country or just because you know, might identify as white or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that you're all the same either. But I have tended to notice that, you know, I think in the dominant society that there's a real concentration, I guess, if that's the right word, to getting to the why as everything. Why is this happening? And that's where it ends. And to me, that's like backwards. Because I'm like, well, no, the why is what we see through observation. Like that's the knowledge part, which is to me is this is happening because da da da. And then the how is how you apply it. But
well, interestingly, if we look at the poll now, the questions come in. So we have, I seek the how of the understanding, and then the why is 34% of respondents, and the why of knowledge, and then the how is 66%. Interesting.
Interesting.
Something to ponder and think about.
Yeah, because I wonder then if, you know, what we think of as the dominant society, like, and again, because we're all living in this time with the protests in the US and here, and many of us are struggling with decolonization wherever we work and live, whatever, you know, national borders we live or work within. You know, I would venture to say that maybe some of the ideas that we would connect to the dominant society maybe don't represent exactly how all of us feel or think, right?
Right.
And maybe that's a way into how do we do the work we need to do for change, right?
Right. You know, it's interesting. Somebody earlier on asked this, and I would love to talk to you further. I mean, it's always great to just hear you talk, and I can let you talk for a long, long time.
Dangerous.
How do you recommend, like, those listening today can be responsible about how they want, if they want to apply the medicine wheel model and what it teaches us and how you're sharing it? What can we identify and be responsible about it as people not from Indigenous First Nations communities and those from communities who don't use it? Mm-hmm. How would you describe the best way forward for that?
Yeah, and I've seen, you know, a few comments to that as well. You know, once I begin to get into a culture perspective, then it's like, oh, people start getting worried, right?
Yeah.
Number one, you know, I was loath to even include this information in my book because, like, hello, who am I, right, to be writing about this stuff? I mean, I'm 52 years old. That's a baby in Indigenous timeline. Like, 52, you know nothing, right? Talk to me when you're 82. And then I've been in circle in community, like in a community environment many times where you go and you ask an elder and that elder will say, I like your question. Let me go talk to the elders. And I'm like, wait, but I thought you were an elder. But they still will ask someone who is older or more knowledgeable than they are, right? So who am I? Well, I said to Michael Thrasher, I said, like, dude, like, what the heck? And I've heard this from other people. I don't just want to put it on him, you know. But,
no pressure.
All of the people who have taught me things in my life say, now that you know, it's your responsibility to pass it on. And so I would offer that as a starting place to anybody who's taking the webinar.
I love that. That's
just
very wise, actually, I think.
Right? And I would never have thought to answer it that way, but that's what I've heard, is that no, knowledge is a group resource. And these models are to be shared. I mean, this is not, you know, a shaking tent ceremony. This is not something with like certain protocols where things could get dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Like, no, this is a thing. It's a model. We can absolutely share this. Where sometimes things get a bit weird because we're talking about an Indigenous model is the issue of appropriation. But listen, for me anyway, and we all have diverse opinions within the Indigenous community or communities, plural. But for me, appropriation is when you take something, you make it your own, you make changes to it, and then usually what ends up happening too is then you seek to profit from it. And this is not what this is about. This is about how can we take something, use it to create our own change, and then the change we need to make within our systems. I don't know. Listen, if I knew how to make a profit from any of this, I'd live in a much bigger place. I would not still be renting a house. Okay. Good luck with this. So for me, the question of appropriation is, one of, you go to a sweat lodge ceremony and then all of a sudden the next weekend you're offering sweat lodge ceremonies at $400 a pop. That's appropriation.
Right.
This is about passing on what we've learned from those who are much more knowledgeable, passing it as was their duty. Like Michael Thrasher's sessions at Trent University at the Elders Gathering, there'd be like hundreds of people in that auditorium, and we were all frantically writing notes and in this, process of cultural reclamation. So be aware of what appropriation is. But I think I would end this little, before we get to the real ending detail on using this model, I think I would end this slide with saying, also give yourself some latitude to make mistakes. And I think this also, relates to some of the chat boxes that I've seen come up, whereas that, we're all in a process of learning all the time. And I'll tell you, the way I used this model 20 years ago, much different now than the way I use it today. I still don't always, I still have to sit with it sometimes and think, right? How exactly? Not saying, now I'm some sort of expert, but that responsibility to share, balance that with a knowledge of appropriation. So don't seek to profit off it or to claim it as your own. Always say where you learned it. This comes from, a webinar that when she learned from grandfather Thrasher, who's originally from around Uranium City in Saskatchewan, So it's Cree Nation, grounded in where it comes from. That also relates to the issue of appropriation, is clearly identifying where something comes from. But also give yourself a break and don't be afraid to say, this is what I've learned. I'm still learning it, but I pass it on. Because sometimes that fear can stop us from using something. And I know my own fear stopped me from using a lot of stuff in my work. And that can stop us from doing our work. So give yourself a break as well, right?
Absolutely. And actually, you're raising such an important point, because I think one of the fears that if we just look at what you're presenting so far is that I don't know enough about this. I don't know how to make this applicable to my community and my situation. And perhaps now when we go through the next few slides, that will become more clear as well. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah. And time-wise, yes, we've got a few minutes to get through some of this, and then hopefully we'll have at least 5 minutes or something for questions.
Well, I don't mind if you want to go 5 minutes over. I'm okay with that. If Suzanne, you're available to do that, and if everybody, whoever can stay, will stay. I'm sorry about the time rush, actually.
Well, it is. We all have busy lives. So let's kind of just get through this, because these are, and let me start by saying that these are questions that I personally have come up with to relate to that movement through the different levels, or that spiral, both the levels within like each quadrant and then around each circle as we learn, right? But if you in a day or a month or a year or 10 years decide that, hey, actually, I like this question better, it makes more sense to me, instead of that question, I'm going to use this question, that's your freedom as a person to do that. Because these are general questions. These are not necessarily grounded in any cultural perspective. These are questions that I have come up with to help us all work through this model, to use this model essentially. So we look at that first, top, all these hierarchical words, but I have to have something because I can't point, right? So that first model, vision, time, feeling, and movement. And I've done it this way. Sorry. Okay. See, sometimes it depends on the workshop I'm doing. Sometimes I do it within the circle. Sometimes I do it in the gaining. So I'm doing it via quadrants this way. I remember. Vision, spiritual, respect, and awareness. So the connections between there, let's use that for our spiral movement today. So just ask yourself the question, what is my vision for blank? You could say your, you know, but if you're asking the question of yourself, what is my vision for, or, you know, if you're working in a group, whatever, what is our vision for blank? Whatever the issue is it your vision for your family? Is it your vision for your workplace? Is it your vision for a particular client? Is it your vision for your sector? Anything. It can absolutely be anything. What is my vision or our vision for blank, whatever the issue is, or the place? And then you go up to spiritual. So spiritual is stories, ceremonies, teachings, whether it's your religion, your spirituality, your ceremonies. What teachings have you received within your culture, within your family, from your elders, from knowledgeable people, from academic people, professors, thinkers, writers that you've admired, right? What are they? Identify them. Lay them right out, because that's going to be your basis for this work. It's going to relate to your vision, right? Because that's how we start getting to this question of equity and reconciliation, is because we're firmly grounding ourselves here in our positionality, which is so important for doing our work and making sure we come at it through an equitable perspective. Is we have to understand, see, be self-aware, and firmly position ourselves within our own relationship to our work, right? So what's our positionality? What are our stories? What are my stories, ceremonies, teachings? Then we move up to that third Eastern quadrant, respect. Well, how will you respect your blank? And again, it's wide open, because if it's a client you're speaking about, if it's your institution, if it's your colleagues, if you're working on systemic change in a staff group, how do we need to change things in this particular institution or this particular place, or in my family? How will you respect your blank? Family, colleagues, clients. And be tough with yourself. This is what self-awareness is about, right? So you have to ask the next question, which is, how have you not respected your blank? Not about getting on yourself in a bad way, but just about being completely self-aware, making yourself vulnerable. And again, it's never always about, and we tend to do this in the helping professions, where it's always about change on the outside. Again, grounding ourselves in change in the internal world, so that we can do our work better and more equitably and toward an eye to reconciliation, is how have I or you or our, we not respected the thing, right? It'll be tough. And then we lead up to awareness, that last, again, hierarchical Eastern quadrant, which is, what new awareness do you have about the situation? Because if you ask all these questions, what's your vision? What's your story, ceremonies, teachings? How will you respect? How have you not respected? You're going to come to a new awareness, right? So let's just motor right through, and then we'll have time for questions. Whoops, I gone too far. And then we get to that, the southern quadrant. So time, physical, relationship, understanding. So how much time do you need to implement your vision? Is this something that's going to take a week, let's say, something in your particular institution? Maybe you want to redesign the reception area for clients. That probably wouldn't take longer than a week. Well, you need to identify the time period. If it's something about your sector, could be a couple of years. If it's, that's up to you, right? The answers. And sometimes you don't know, but you need to sort of start thinking about it at this point, right? And then if you need to change it as you go, that's fine. This is remember, once you get up to the top, you go right down to the bottom again, right? So you keep making adjustments if you need to. Here's an important thing. When we get up to physical, how does your body feel right now? Because the Cartesian dominant society, I think therefore I am model, Enlightenment European model, tends to really prioritize going at our work through an intellectual, doing the research, reading the textbooks, getting our credentials, all of which is very important. But how does my body feel right now? So to ask the staff group that in a staff meeting, or to, if you're working on, safety goals with a client or a learning plan with a student or whatever it is, how does your body feel right now? Very important. And that's, again, all related to that balance between mind, body, spirit, and emotion, right? So then heading up to relationship, what relationships do you see on the land around you? And what do they teach you? And that gets to that other comment I said about, watching things, observing things as they occur in the land, and that understanding that we are part of the land. I'm writing a children's book right now on lessons from the fire, because when I moved to the place that I'm living in, I had to relearn, essentially reteach myself, because I was like 15 when I left Northern Alberta for more educational opportunities, right? I'm now in my 50s. Heavens, it's been 35 years since I built like a fire and a wood stove to keep myself warm every day. Boy, when I got back here and started living with a wood stove, I really sucked at building fires. They were really smoking and they weren't hot. And I was like, oh, I have to heat myself. My place is freezing. And so I just watched the fire, and I let the fire teach me what it was going to teach me about, okay, maybe I need to do it differently this way. So anything can be a teacher, whether it's a fire, whether it's a bird on a, tree, and I'm looking out the window of my office, and anything can teach you. Whether it's the tides going down to the beach, the night sky, anything, but you have to be in it, and you have to open yourself up to that and try to understand the lessons that the world is teaching you. That's our beginning to relationship, right? And then we get to understanding, how does this help you understand your vision? So go back to the Eastern quadrant, right? How does this help you understand your vision on a deeper, more complex level? Because it should, and it will. And I see people having to leave. I'm so sorry that we've had to go a little bit over, but you will get the slides, so you will get all the questions. And thank you for the time. And for those who do have an extra few minutes, we're almost done. Let's go to that third slide. So feeling, emotional, reason, knowledge, working up the Western side of that spiral. How do you feel about the situation? Because sometimes when we have that vision, right? Like, oh, something at this blank workplace needs to change, or something at this, something about this relationship with my boss needs to change, or something, whatever it is, that vision that we have, it usually comes with a set of feelings, right? So we need to know what our feelings are so that we, again, recognize our positionality. Because those feelings are going to sometimes place us in relationship to the work. And if we get stuck there, if we're angry or if we're sad about something, sometimes it makes us stuck. So be aware. How do I feel about the situation? Then work up to emotions, because of course the difference between feelings and emotions, and oh man, Grandfather Thrasher has to go through this a couple times with me because I didn't always understand it. Oh, long Skype sessions.
You might be getting a lot of emails, I have a feeling.
Long Skype sessions where he'd be like, it bugs me when people confuse feelings and emotions. It was like, emotions are making sense of feelings. Because then when we name the emotion, we can start seeing patterns and stuff, right? When we're in the emotion, sometimes, So how does your vision for the future help you make sense of your feelings? That's the making sense part of actually identifying an emotion. Well, I've got this vision, and I get that it's because I'm kind of mad about this, or I'm sad about this, or I'm whatever, I'm frustrated about this. So take it up, make sense of it, name it as an emotion. Then move on to reason and ask yourself, what knowledge do you need to realize your vision? Where do you, find that knowledge? Because it's usually never going to come just from us, but we're going to need that research or other people to work with, or places to learn. So what knowledge do you need to realize your vision? And then to get to knowledge, how would you describe the situation now? So what new knowledge do I have about all of this, right? That I can apply to the work that needs to be done. And I just saw a chat comment that I would really love to reference because it's awesome. Well, I don't know, actually. I only see the first bits and I click on it, right? I hope it was an awesome comment and not a complaint. Oh dear. But, you know, someone just said, you know, this is kind of like a personal counseling session. Indeed, that's the medicine wheel model. That's the beauty of the medicine wheel model, is that we start with the individual, right? And asking ourselves these questions, designing, understanding, well, not designing, well, no, designing the vision for change and the framework that we're going to work through change by starting with ourselves, right? And another comment, the professional is personal. Exactly. It's all about positionality. And that's why equity and reconciliation comes as being embedded in this, because we have to acknowledge that positionality and our feelings and all that stuff before we actually get to the work part. We can't just go, okay, I'm a person working in this sector and I'm going to do this work and skip over all that stuff. We have to get to the stuff in this model, right? In the middle between vision, time, and, you know, awareness and wisdom, right? So yeah, this is great. I love the comments. So then we've got some knowledge. What knowledge do you need to realize your vision? And then how would you describe the situation now? And the reason why, by the way, we balance emotional and reason together in the Western door, again, east, south, west, north, is because we can't just work off our emotions. We all know as professionals that it comes into our work. And as I say, it's often along with the guiding vision, the reason why we do our work, right? The whole reason why I wrote Legacy is because I was like, oh, we need to figure this out, people. I was frustrated, right? Both in our systems and, right? Frustrated with myself, like, how can I do better at this? But then we make sense of it through naming an emotion, but then we need to get to the reason part, balance it with reason to get that knowledge, right? And that helps us do our work. So it's all, again, about that balance, right? So the last set of questions, and again, you can morph the questions as you go on with this model. These are just the questions I use. So then we get to movement, intellectual, behavior, and wisdom. So the north quadrants as we go along that spiral. So movement, how will you carry out your vision? Is this about moving furniture around in your office? Is it about going back to school to get more credentials so you can have a different position, you know, different daily workplace kind of thing? What is it? What is the movement? Is it about changing a policy in your workplace? Whatever it is, how will you carry out your vision? What do you need to do? That's the movement. What steps will you take to stay mindful during this work? So intellectual, yes, you're gathering knowledge. That was a previous step. But staying mindful, balancing the intellectual with all of the other balance that we've already hit, right? Staying mindful. Then behavior. Well, what behaviors do you have to engage in to embrace change? What will you stop engaging in? And also, what does your organization, because again, it could be you, it could be it could be our institution or organization. What behaviors do you need to start engaging in, and what behaviors do you need to stop? And, you know, behaviors can be policy driven in an organization. It can be personal approaches if we're talking about an individual, right? And then the wisdom part is what I think I started the whole thing off with, right? Is how are we going to share our vision? How are we going to build on that? How are we going to use this to create change in our own places and to share that and hopefully create change in the wider world and in the lives of the folks we work with? And so to that end, I would end with these few final thoughts, which is that there are no right answers. These answers are going to be very personal and particular to you and your work and your sector, and also the nature of the vision and the place that you're in. Is it institutional? Is it systemic? Is it client focused? Are you the person who writes the policy? Are you the person who maybe, you know, writes the information like textbooks that people are going to use? There's no right answers. I think in school, as an educator, I can say, you know, we're often taught in school, at least when I was in school, that, you know, there's a right and a wrong answer. Yeah, not so much with the medicine wheel model. You will find out if something is right for you, or the transformative, you know, if your vision is right, by how it's either coming together or not coming together. And then you can morph that as you go, right? But how this relates to reconciliation is, you know, we need to change our thinking in order to change our systems. And this is, again, if I don't want to be at all like glomming on to things, but at the same time, what is going on in the world right now as we're having this webinar with the protests in the US and to a certain extent in Canada, is a lot of people are talking about systemic change. Oh, let's get, you know, defund. Yes, I'm in favor of that, by the way. Or, you know, or let's have cameras is the latest thing in the CBC this morning. But where's the change in thinking, right? So there's a lot of skipping stuff that happens when you're not working with both a very detailed and holistic model like the medicine wheel. When you don't go through all of these questions, not getting at that change in thinking. The thinking and the systems are each feeding off one another. And so the medicine wheel or medicine circle, you know, can affect the change in thinking and the change in systems, because it's our thinking that brings us through the transformational from vision to change, right? And then I don't know if we have a lot of time. I will be so short with this because, yeah, we're over time, folks. I'm so sorry. But in the last like couple of minutes, this is really all about equity and reconciliation. Because again, these are big words, right? And people are like, well, what does that mean? It means we do our work in a way that changes power structures. Because racism, oppression, and so, of course, colonization, which is based on those two things, is about power, and not in the good way, right? It's about power over, not power with, right? So we need to change power structures. I think in the context of so many of us dealing with intergenerational trauma, or as I've heard in the Black community, both a long time ago and over the last couple of weeks with the protests, the word that I usually hear used is generational trauma. Some people in the US with Indigenous specific work call it historical trauma. But of course it carries through to the present day. So for me, I use the term intergenerational trauma. But we do need to think about trauma-informed services. That's where both equity and reconciliation is going to come from, because we cannot do our work in isolation from understanding that we work in a colonial world, and that we work in a world that is based on, you know, the oppression of the land and the oppression of the people who are here, oppression of people who are deemed to not be, I don't know why, deemed to not be the same as others and not deserving of, you know, what the reality is. So we need to change those power structures. We need to provide trauma-informed services. So really being aware of the burden of colonialism. And then guess what? We just need to work together better. And I don't mean to be at all like, you know, casual about it or flippant. But I think sometimes we don't always identify that as part of the vision or the goal. You know, we have the lofty and needed, you know, work of, okay, this is the change we need to make, and this is, but we kind of forget that this is all about working together better. Mm-hmm. So whether it's me and the natural world and locating myself and my positionality and getting my vision and learning and doing all that work that we just went through, whether it's working together better as a staff set, as colleagues, whether it's working better with clients within our sectors, whatever it is, within communities, families, it all relates to being trauma-informed. You know, that isn't all that we are as Indigenous peoples or marginalized peoples. We are more than just colonization, of course, but we can't deny that it has affected our communities, right? And so it's about changing that and power structures. And then I think, yay, we're only like 10 minutes over, I think.
Only 10 minutes over.
Yeah.
Do you want to take 5 minutes just to answer questions, or if there are
any? If there are still people here that don't have to rush off to another meeting, I'm absolutely okay for a few minutes of questions. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Duncan?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And it's been a really powerful conversation. And your last slide there and what you just shared actually answered, I would say, most of the questions that have come through. There is one question though that I don't know has been referenced, but a few people were curious if you had, one or two pieces of advice on how people could best kind of work through this model. What would they be?
I think go back to those 4 gifts on, again, I don't mean it in a hierarchical sense, but on that first wheel, right? The vision, time, movement, and now I'm blanking on the north. Vision, time, the first one. And it's not about memorization. I don't memorize a thing. I have to look it up all the time because I don't want to remember it incorrectly. I look it up all the time. But on the first wheel, when you asked me that question, I thought to myself, time. Give yourself time. Give yourself time to do the work that needs to be done. And I can relate this with a short personal example, which is that, there were times when I was writing Legacy that I thought, oh my gosh, this book's trying to kill me. And I thought it would never be done. And in the end, it took me 6 years. Now, I took a year off there. So 5-ish, 3 to 5 actual writing, but 6 in thinking. And then, of course, a year of production with my publisher and stuff. And I never thought it would take that long. I never thought my journey as an educator would be, as long as it's been, or taken as many twists and turns as it has. So give yourself time. I think if that's the one thing I could say about using this model myself in my work, don't be too hard on yourself. Understand that you are one person and you have your gifts. Give yourself that time, right? Don't be too hard on yourself.
Thank you so much. We have one final question, and this question comes from Alania. And they ask, I was wondering what good resources there are for learning to work through a trauma-informed lens.
Well, funny you should say that, because I just created a website. It's currently, I haven't done a big launch about it. It's just been in soft launch. I put it online. What month are we in? Pandemic brain. It's June. I think I put it online, was it January or February? It's been up for a couple months. And that's one thing that I had a problem with when I published Legacy, is I thought, I'm putting this book out here, but I feel like there's nowhere for people to go to actually learn how to apply this stuff in the work environment, or what does it mean to be trauma informed? I mean, yes, I have little explanations in the book and stuff, but yeah, so I've started a website called traumastoryhealing.ca. And right now it's mostly, not always, but it's mostly resources that I found on other websites, other organizations that I particularly respected and found very useful. So rather than everybody doing as I had to do when I wrote the book and go to a gazillion different places and try to piece together something coherent, I felt like, okay, I'm going to put together a clearinghouse website where people can go and access all of these things from different places. So that's what's currently up. But and there's some great information on there. They're doing a lot of work in Australia around what does it mean to provide trauma-informed frameworks at the community level. There's been some stuff in Canada that I've posted around, working with survivors of childhood sexual abuse. you know, what does it mean for a teacher to be trauma informed in teaching in my school? So there's some videos and some documents, traumastoryhealing.ca, and I don't make any money off that site, by the way. I'm not trying to.
And
I'm not
Duncan
trying
actually
to appropriate and profit off it. No.
Duncan posted in the chat box. He posted the web link. So
yeah, I saw that. Duncan posted that. So, but yeah, I actually find that there are a few good books, and I listed those in the bibliography for Legacy. And again, Legacy, you don't have to buy a copy. It is available in libraries, so you can always photocopy the bibliography and maybe look up some of those. Like, not all the research papers, of course, are really, you know, readable or usable for our purposes here. But there are a couple of books around, you know, and just search your local library database too around, or your academic library, around trauma-informed. There are a few, I don't want to say a publisher because I'm probably going to remember it wrong, but there are a few books around, you know, in certain sectors, whether it's counseling or whether it's, you know, education around what does it mean to be trauma informed in your practice. You might find some online results, but right now, I don't think we have a handle on what it really means to be trauma informed and to provide our work within various sectors. So that's, you know, where you get up, it's a good way to end actually, when you get up to the wisdom and you go kerplunk right back down and start it over again. So this for me is stage 2. So I wrote the book as my vision and moving through and sharing this knowledge. And now that's where I'm starting, just starting with the website. And I want to start doing some, you know, YouTube videos and devising some original content to answer that exact question, which is, what does this mean in my sector? And interviewing other people, because of course I don't know every sector, right? So interviewing, having conversations with other people in different sectors, and then posting that, you know, on the channel, which of course will be cross-posted to the website, around what does it look like in your sector to be trauma informed, and what are resources that you would suggest? And so again, really bringing together and sharing the information that we need to share in order to do this work. So I'm still at the beginning stages of this, but yeah, there's a few things. They're all on the website. I brought them all together, so check that out. And then once you click on those videos, you know, then you can find out those websites if there's anything else, and, you know, maybe make more lateral jumps to other sources as well. So
that's amazing. I can't thank you enough. We've come to time, and we really appreciate all of those who have stayed on and obviously taken the time to be with us today. And Suzanne, I think this is just telling us that we have to do a part 2 to this webinar at some point in the near future, once you actually have started to bring all that wisdom together.
Sure.
Thank you so much for this really informative and fantastic webinar experience. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and thanks everyone for giving me some of your very precious time. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you everyone. And if you want further resources, there are going to be resources posted with the recording of the webinar on our website. Have a great day.